Last week, I didn't go back and listen to the class to see if I said this or not, but I think I said something about Daniel 7 kind of being right there at the halfway point, and we could group Daniel 7 with the first 6 chapters. We could also see how Daniel 7 goes with chapters 8 through 12. So I think on the study guide I said it's kind of a bridge chapter. It ties the two halves of the book together. We tend to group chapter 7 with the last part of the book. Style of language comes to mind. Daniel 7 certainly is that figurative, apocalyptic style language. All of the dreams, what can we say of all of the dreams in Daniel 7 through 12? Anything they have in common? Whose dreams were they? Who had the dreams? Daniel, as opposed to rulers having dreams in chapters 1 through 6. I guess we'd also include the handwriting on the wall. It wasn't really a dream. It was something that was beheld, though. And then we can group it with chapters 2 through 6, certainly based on language. Chapter 7 is the last of the chapters to be written in Aramaic, along with chapters 2 through 6. Content and theme, I guess that would apply to the whole book, but I think certainly chapter 7, we see I'm missing the word I'm looking for. We don't move away at all from the central theme of the book, do we? God rules in the kingdoms of men. We see that reinforced very powerfully in chapter 7. In fact, in the study material, you'll notice kind of this. It's called a chiasm. I'm using the language here, structured repetition. And you see enough of these in Scripture that you start to think, this sure looks like it was intentional. Where you have these parallel thoughts here. Nebuchadnezzar's dream of 4 world kingdoms and God's kingdom. Then in chapter 7, Daniel dreaming of 4 world kings and God's kingdom. Now, those two dreams differ in a lot of ways, but those two dreams also have some marked similarities. And then, of course, you have in chapter 3, God delivering Daniel's friends from, we could state this more generally in such a way that B would match B prime absolutely identically, wouldn't have no variation in the wording. God delivers Daniel's friends, God delivers Daniel. Both of them took a stand. God humbles the pagan king Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4, and then, of course, in chapter 5, God humbles the pagan king Belshazzar. And you kind of follow all of that towards some central point, and you could argue that the central thought here is found in chapter 4 and verse 37, where Nebuchadnezzar says, all of God, the king, all his works are true, his ways just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride. Not saying you have to outline the book in this way, but this certainly would show us how chapter 7 really does fit with chapters 2 through 6. But of course, 7 also goes with the end of the book. We also notice, last week, we noted that chapters 7 and 8 actually fit on the timeline chronologically earlier in Daniel, between chapters 4 and 5. And so I think we've got another, and between chapter 4 and chapter 7, we have a span of some 20 plus years where, Daniel's kind of faded from the scene. We've noted Belshazzar didn't really know who he was. Kind of amazing when you think of how Daniel had served with such distinction for all of that time, but that's what happens with the passage of even just a little bit of time, how things fade from our collective conscience and awareness. And but In the interim, between chapters 4 and 5, come these dreams of chapters 7 and 8. So when Daniel is summoned to appear before Belshazzar, I want you to just remember, when he appears before Belshazzar, he is armed with the experience of having gone through, experienced these visions, and it was an experience, wasn't it? We're told in the text the sort of dramatic impact. It had no small impact on Daniel, physically, emotionally, mentally. And of course, there's the matter of the interpretation, and he's received that through God's messenger. And so he has gone through that, chapter 7 and chapter 8. And with that knowledge in his mind, he speaks rather confidently, doesn't he, to Belshazzar? We've noted, someone in the class noted how boldly he spoke to Belshazzar. Well, I think in no small part to the confidence and comfort that he would have received from these visions. Terrifying as they were initially, I think on balance, we can see how these visions would bring great comfort to someone like Daniel, just to be reminded, if nothing else, of the sovereignty of God. Of course, as we've noted, chapter 7, starting with chapter 7, the language begins to get, shall we say, rather interesting. There's a lot of imagery. We see written pictures of things like these. This is an artist. No, this is not a photograph of, it'd have been a vision anyway, but this was actually pretty neat. If anybody's interested, I can try and look up the website. Somebody made these free for use, and I thought, well, how cool. And there's some for Revelation too, Jacob. But anyway, how many of you are visual learners? And I'm going to tell you that whenever we read a text like this, whether you have a nice graphic like this or not, we're all doing it, right? When we read it, we're trying to paint that picture. And it's useful to, one of the first questions to ask yourself is, okay, before I delve any further into this and try to get down in the weeds on this, what is the picture saying? And try to keep it in my mind to one sentence. What emotions does it convey? What impact is this picture, do you think, intended to have? What's it intended to have in terms of impact on the reader? And usually that will get you off to a very good start in understanding the purpose. We'll talk more about this later, but there's always a caution of trying to press the details of an analogy like this too far. So anyway, there's a balance to be struck there. But here's a question I do want to pose to you. Be eager to get your thoughts. We have our runners with the mics back there. How do we know that the language in chapter 7, much of it is figurative? What do you have, as a reader of literature, how would you know if the language was intended to be figurative and not taken literally? Okay? Yeah, so words in English class, a grammar class, like or as, I believe the term for that is a simile. Wow, how about that? Remembered something. Yeah, look in chapter 7 and verse 4. The first, so he's beginning to describe what he saw. He wrote the matter down. Verse 4, the first was, my Bible says, like a lion. Maybe yours says, look like a lion. So these pictures are highly subjective, right? What looks like a lion? Well, it would have, enough features, whatever he saw, would have had enough features to resemble, in many respects, a lion. Did it look exactly like this? I dare say probably not, okay? It looked like a lion. Verse 5, same thing. Another beast, a second one. Now, my translation says resembling a bear. Maybe yours also says like. Verse 6, after this I kept looking. Behold, another one, like a leopard. Verse 8, while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them. 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man. Okay? Common sense kicks in. It's not saying the horn had human eyeballs, but it had eyes like a human's and a mouth, uttering great boasts. Verse 9, kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow. Okay, so you get the point. When the text gives you that sort of, okay, this is like something, that's a tell, isn't it? What are some other ways you know that the language is figurative? If you're reading literature, how would you be able to discern or conclude? Let's say you don't have the likes or the ases in the text. What else might you consider?
You did say in my vision.
Okay. In my vision, verse 2, I looked in the vision. Okay. Sometimes, Revelation 1 just tells you up front, this is a book of pictures. It is signified. Here it is a vision. Okay. All right. How else would you know? Microphone over here for Ethan.
Well, if you look at places like verse 10, Scripture often uses numbers like these to represent more of an idea or a concept like completeness, or in this case, something like a large multitude, right? So you see numbers most likely not going to be specifically literal, rather representing something else.
Okay. It would at least introduce if you have language that is normally associated with or used in a manner consistent with apocalyptic literature, it would at least then, you have on the table, okay, there's a good possibility this could be figurative because of those things that are popping off the page at you. Very good. Numbers could be one of those things. Other expressions that this text, if this is your first foray into apocalyptic literature, in biblical literature, the idea of the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, and you start to see that kind of language used in similar texts elsewhere. All right. Sometimes I'll just posit a couple of other thoughts, and then we'll move on. Sometimes, sometimes a literal interpretation, when you look at it, just can't work. I'm not going to delve into examples of that, but you look at that and think, okay, it's very clear he's not intended, to describe something that literally happens. But one of the biggest tells, if you look in verse 17 of Daniel 7, verse 17, these great beasts. So this is heaven's answer, as to what does this mean? Divine commentary here, okay? So we're going to put a lot of stock in whatever's said here. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are four great beasts. No, that's not what he says. These great beasts are 4 kings, and really, verse 23, kingdoms, okay? Kings and kingdoms. So he's describing 4 kingdoms, 4 world kingdoms. So anytime the text says this, imagery is actually that, that's another way to know. So just as a reminder, this text really contains a lot of those tells. Okay, more graphics here. Again, trying to visualize what this scene might have looked like. Maybe your waters are a lot choppier, right? As chapter 7 begins, as this vision begins, by the way, when does he see this? In the night. He's laying on his bed. You ever find that your thoughts tend to get darker in direct proportion to the amount of sunlight, visible light outside? I think nighttime tends to promote that. So Anyway, I don't know if there's any intentional correspondence here with this, but these are visions in the night. Behold, the four winds of heaven are stirring up the great sea. So, like, your waters may be a lot choppier, right? Winds, probably a good interpretation of the winds here are forces used by God to control and destroy, as that expression of winds is sometimes used in Scripture. You can't see the wind, right? What do you see with regard to the wind? The effects of the wind. And the winds here are having an effect on the waters, the sea, often associated in Scripture with the massive humanity, the nations of the world. Several places in Isaiah, Ezekiel also use this way in the book of Revelation. What adjectives do you associate with stormy seas? Give me some adjectives besides stormy. Chaotic. Churning. Raging. Unpredictable. Dangerous. Well, that would all be good adjectives to describe human affairs, wouldn't it? And the conflicts that break out between human beings. So, what he's describing here, I believe, a progression of world kingdoms from one to the other to the other. Well, what adjectives would we use to describe the scenarios that arise, that result in one kingdom being destroyed and another kingdom rising to power? Chaos, churning, raging, war. So it's fitting imagery, isn't it, to describe this? So that's the scene. He's using imagery to describe. He's talking about world history here again. Let me get, not on the right page here. Okay. No, here we are. Okay, so then, the four winds of heaven stir up the great sea. And then he says, four huge beasts come up from the sea. We're going to try to go through this rather quickly, because I'm trusting that you were able to read this ahead of time. But so here begins this description. And again, just as you let this language, kind of pass through your mind, just try to think, okay, what is this communicating? And just in a very general level, okay? So the first is like a lion. Any other features? Has eagle's wings. Okay, so this is what our artist did. Eagle's wings. And as we read about the lion, we learn that the wings were torn off. It is not specified in the dream by who, but we could infer something about whoever tore the wings off of that would have to be what? Could you tear the wings off of something like that? Unimaginably powerful. Lifted up from the ground and set on its feet like a man and given a human mind. Does that take your mind back in this book at all? To where? To Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4. That very well could point back to that. What world kingdom is this describing? The Babylonians, so that would fit. I didn't delve into this aspect of it, but I'm led to understand that many of these motifs are common in Near Eastern literature. And I did see somewhere where lions and eagles, that Babylon was identified with both animals. In prophecy, particularly in the book of Jeremiah, the Babylonians are described as the being like lions and eagles in different way. So lion would convey the idea of strength, power, fierceness. The wings of an eagle, what would that bring to it? Okay. Yeah, the eagle's kind of the king of the birds. The lion's the king of the beasts. I mean, wings would convey swiftness, right? They can be on their prey just like that. Okay. So that would be a very deadly combo, wouldn't it? Very dominant combo at its peak of power and strength. Again, it's a picture, and we're left as readers to ponder, what is that conveying? How are you feeling if you're Daniel at this point? You're having a vision in the night of this. When you laid down, you might have hoped you would have had other more pleasant dreams. But he's dreaming about this lion. But it's not the fiercest one. Then, well, this is a picture of, the wings have been torn off, and it's standing upright. Then you have this bear, verse 5, I think. Raised up on one side, and maybe that's what that looked like. Was it laying down and had one side up in the air? I'm not going to reenact that up here. What would that suggest? One possibility could be that since, what kingdom would this pertain to? The Medo-Persians. It's been suggested, well, the Persians were more powerful than the Medes. So if in fact it looked like this, the bear would strike with its more powerful paw, perhaps. I don't know. But just raised up on one side, 3 ribs in its mouth. The bear has found his prey. The bear likes to eat. 3 ribs. Why 3? The Medes and the Persians had 3 huge victories. I think over Lydia and Babylon and one other, maybe Egypt. Maybe that's what it's talking about. Again, this is just a picture. What does this convey? Okay? Cruel? Go ahead and give him the mic. Say that again.
The bear is cruel and vicious.
Cruel and vicious? That's right. That's absolutely right. Relentless? That's a good question. Yeah. It's coming after the lion. Okay. Are all 4 beasts there together at once? Good thought. All right, then you have this leopard, 4 wings of a bird on its back, 4 heads, and given dominion. And I couldn't help but think, here's another cat chosen as the imagery. I don't know if this is intended or not, but a leopard is not a lion. So maybe not as strong. Maybe in terms of swiftness, Alexander conquered the world in a very short period of time. And so the 4 wings on its back, 4 would be arguably faster than 2. 4 heads, that's the number 4 is going to be used quite a lot, to your point, Ethan, with the Greek Empire. We'll see this in chapter 8 as well. The number 4. Got the mic coming.
Was it Alexander's kingdom divided up among 4 generals?
Yeah, it was. So 4 heads. Was this the 4 territories, the 4 main divisions of the Greek Empire? Or perhaps more likely after his death, his kingdom was divided up among 4 of his generals, I think. Okay, and given dominion. Again, caption under this photo so far. You're having this dream. How are you doing? Do you dream with this kind of detail? I don't generally dream with this kind of detail. Would you want to talk to somebody after this? Well, then comes the one that receives far more focus than the other three combined, at least in this chapter, is you have this. And now you're really stretching it in terms of trying to capture this artistically, because it's called the fourth beast. Why is he called the fourth beast? He or she. Why the fourth beast? Well, yeah, different from all the rest. It's not, there's nothing comparable. I mean, there's no beast in creation of which the prophet could say it was like that. It's just different. In fact, the adjectives here, he describes it early in this chapter. He describes it later. Frightening, dreadful, not like the others, and then later on, extremely terrifying, incredibly strong. We're told early, large iron teeth. Later, we're also told, he goes into a second description of this beast, bronze claws. And what does it do? It devours, it crushes, and then whatever's left, it tramples under its feet. Anybody want a pet like this? Now, I'm going to show a close-up of this guy, and I want you to focus on these three horns. This artist went all out on this to try to help us visualize this. What happened to three of the horns in the vision? They're what? They're uprooted by what's called the little horn. So there's the little horn. Now, how would you draw a little horn that's boasting of great things, that has eyes like a human eye? I don't know, but that seems to match the picture. You want to go anywhere near this thing? How's Daniel doing? Wrong chapter. 15. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me. Visions in my mind kept alarming me. Verse 28. At this point, the revelation ended. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming me. My face grew pale. He kept the matter to himself because what does God tell him to do? In lieu of proclaiming this to others. Remember what he says to Daniel? Write it down. Write it down. That's what he does. Keeps it to himself, doesn't tell others, but he writes it down. Interesting. Interesting. What do we learn for ourselves about the impact this has on Daniel? It is the purpose of, just by looking at Daniel's response, is part of the purpose of this vision being accomplished, being achieved? What's the purpose of if it is so, I believe it is so, that this is describing the same kingdoms from chapter 2. But this time not with bright and shiny metal or even clay, materials of construction, but this time described in this way. There has to be a different purpose this time for depicting the progression from one world kingdom to another in this fashion. Just based on a initial response, what emotions do you think this imagery is intended to capture? Personal fear. horror. These beasts are terrifying. These beasts are capable of really causing suffering. What are they depicting? World kingdoms. Okay? We're looking at world kingdoms now not in terms of their power and their prestige per se, their glory. We're looking at them in terms of their capacity to what? To inflict suffering, particularly on God's people. So these beasts, I dare say, capture the horrors of human sins, the horrors of human oppression, the capacity of the abuse that world kingdoms may make of their God-given power to afflict, to torment, to mistreat, to instill fear in. But then, I asked this question, you don't have to answer. Why is the fourth beast not compared with any known creature? I find that curious. But then even here, there are hints of someone else behind the scenes working. Someone, I won't scroll back, tore the wings off the lion. Someone commanded the bear, get up, gorge yourself on much flesh. Someone gave dominion to the creature like a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings. Someone allowed this beast to come up out of the sea, this thing. Now, when you look at the behavior, this little horn seems to have a mind all its own. And the little horn is projecting, I am not accountable to anyone. I'll do what I want, when I want, where I want. And yet he's called what? By the way, whose vantage point are we getting this from? Well, you could kind of answer that one of 2 ways. To some extent, to a large extent, this is how people see these kingdoms. But you're already getting heaven's vantage point on this. He calls him a little horn. I don't know if that was intended to be dismissive, kind of like we might say, bless your heart, He sees this little horn as nothing. It's boasting, it's writing checks that it can't cash, right? And what is it? We learn later, what is this horn doing? Speaking arrogantly, making war with the saints and prevailing over them. Remember this when we come to Revelation 13 in a few months. This text, filled with this is that, is kind of like a key to helping you understand some of the language later. All right, enough of those. Now, we're flying through this. Actually, we're not. We're flying through that clock back there. We're now retold the story from heaven. What do you have in verses 9 through 14? You have quite a different picture from fearsome beasts and stormy seas. You have the Ancient of Days. The picture of purity, his hair is white as snow. His clothing is as white as snow. He's a picture of wisdom. His hair is like white wool. Then you have the throne, fiery flames, wheels, burning fire. A stream of fire comes out from before him. Contrast with Revelation where it's a river of life. What's fire a picture of? Well, it can be. I don't think that's what the picture is here. Judgment. Who's God getting ready to judge, you think? Oh, I don't know. How about the little horn? How about these 4 kingdoms that got too big for their britches? That abused the power that God granted to them. A stream of fire comes out from before them. Now you compare those beasts in all their purported strength with 1,000,000 serve him. The idea here is not to do math. You will be relieved if math was not your forte. You don't have to get out a calculator and multiply 10,000 times 10,000. I'll save you the trouble. It's 100 million. The point is that it's infinite. And they stand before him. And oh yeah, the courts sit in judgment and books are open. What do you think in this context the books contain? What does God know about? The record of these kingdoms and all the things they've done. Books were opened. I think there's another book in our Bible that uses that language, but I digress. And then, oh my, we're not going to get... The Son of Man comes with the clouds of heaven, presented before the Ancient of Days, and he is given dominion and glory and a kingdom so that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. So you have these words like everlasting, you have these words like indestructible, the same ideas from chapter 2. You have this progression of 4 kingdoms. You have God very powerfully and dramatically establishing his kingdom. But the language, the imagery is completely different in both. Which says that there are different things to be learned from those. They're parallel, yet different in some important ways. The first one was Nebuchadnezzar's dream. That imagery was chosen for that pagan king. Why would it be important to use these beasts for Daniel? Why not scare Nebuchadnezzar to death? Actually, he was scared to death just with a statue of metals and clay. Why choose these beasts? Think of God's people.
People would seek protection somewhere. For the most,
Yep.
Their fear would be turned to the most powerful forces that they know.
That's right. That's right. They're living in captivity, right? They're living in fear. And God's people are going to endure a lot in the coming centuries. So what message does God's people need? What message do we need today? I'll stay away from that. Come Sunday and hear this lesson Jacob's going to preach. What do we take away from this? Well, we must be careful in interpreting apocalyptic language. I won't say too more about that now, too much more. The horrors of human power and sin can be terrifying. That's what an initial glimpse at the pictures suggests to us. Actually, they say it very plainly. But God is far greater and far more powerful than the fiercest threat to his people on earth. So whatever threat to your faith, whatever imagery you would use to describe threats to your faith, by the way, this type of language is used with us Christians in the New Testament. The devil prowls about like a roaring lion. God is far greater and far more powerful, and so he grants and leverages and defeats human power in accordance to his purpose, and knowing this brings us comfort and confidence. Yeah.
Daniel supplying the attitudes of fear and things that are terrifying.
Is Daniel supplying the adjectives of fear and describing the fourth beast? Yeah. By inspiration, but yeah. I mean, to some extent, we're getting his reaction to it. In fact, he's very open about That's entirely consistent with his personal response to the dreams.